Did you really think we'd let someone like her touch a badge again? The words sliced through the air like a whip. Laughter followed, loud, mocking, echoing off the cracked tiles of the small interrogation room. 4 officers stood around a chair where a young black woman sat, her wrists still marked from handcuffs. Her name was Amara Lewis, once a cadet with a spotless record. Now just another example, as they called it. Their laughter wasn't just mean, it was rehearsed. The kind that comes from power unchecked. One of them, Sergeant Mason, leaned close, the metal clippers humming in his hand. "Let's make sure you remember who runs this city," he said, smiling for the camera one of the others held up. Amara didn't move. Didn't cry. Her jaw tightened, her eyes fixed on the blank wall ahead. The clippers buzzed, and with each stroke a piece of her hair fell to the floor, dark curls landing beside her boots. "Smile for us," one officer sneered. "You'll look good on the internet," the others roared. The camera light flickered. The sound of the clippers grew louder, sharper, drowning out her heartbeat, her breath, her silence. But she didn't give them what they wanted. No tears, no pleas, just stillness. The kind of stillness that comes right before a storm. When they finished, Mason tilted her chin up with one finger. "There. Now maybe you'll learn to respect authority." For a long moment, Amara stared at him. Her voice, calm but cutting, finally broke the silence. "Respect doesn't come from fear," she said quietly. "It comes from justice." He laughed, too loudly, like someone covering his own unease. "Justice? Sweetheart, you'll never see the inside of a courtroom again." But that night, as she was thrown out onto the cold pavement, hair uneven, face bruised, Amara looked up at the city lights. Somewhere above the noise, she whispered to herself, "They'll remember this." Cut to, years later, the same city, but everything has changed. Flashing lights, reporters, court banners reading public trial. Inside the courthouse, whispers swirl. "Is that her? No way. That's the same woman. Judge Amara Lewis, the one they humiliated?" But that revelation belongs to another chapter. Back in the past, that night still burned into her memory. She walked for miles through rain that felt heavier than shame. Every step forward was a refusal to give up. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. "They can take your job, baby. They can even take your hair, but they can't take what's inside you." And that was the moment she decided. If the system had no place for her, she'd build her own way back in. Days became months. She worked cleaning offices by night, studying law books she found discarded outside libraries by day. Every insult became fuel. Every sleepless night a step closer, still. The memory of those 4 officers, their laughter, their smirks, and followed her like a ghost. Sometimes she'd catch her reflection in a mirror, the uneven patches of regrown hair, the faint scar above her brow, and she'd whisper, "Not yet." But soon, the city moved on. They forgot. But she didn't. Until one morning, years later, the same police department, desperate to restore its reputation after a corruption scandal, announced a new recruitment campaign. Integrity, equality, redemption, and Amara applied. Not as a cop this time, but as a lawyer. When her application reached the review board, one of the officers scoffed. "Amara Lewis? That name sounds familiar." "Yeah," another chuckled. "Isn't she the one?" "Let it go," Mason interrupted, flipping the folder shut. "She's not getting in anyway." But Amara had learned one thing from their cruelty. Never announce your comeback. Let them see it when it's too late. The first courtroom she walked into as a clerk, she felt her hands tremble. Not from fear, but from memory. The walls were the same color as that interrogation room. Cold. Gray. But now, she wasn't the one sitting in the chair. And though no one knew yet, not the judge, not the clerks, not the officers watching her from the gallery, something had already shifted. Because Amara Lewis wasn't there to forget what they did. She was there to change what justice meant. And one day they'd stand before her again. Only this time she'd be the one asking the questions. Fade out. "Yo, record this. People need to see what happens when you mouth off to the police." The officer's voice was loud, cruel, and full of fake laughter. The phone camera was pointed straight at Amara, her head half-shaved, tears of sweat mixing with broken strands of hair. She sat there motionless, her dignity hanging by a thread as their laughter filled the room. "Smile," one of them sneered. "You're famous now," and just like that, click. The video began to spread. By morning, it was everywhere. Hashtags, memes, comments. Another wannabe hero. She probably deserved it. Play stupid games. Win stupid prizes. Amara watched it all unfold from a cracked phone screen, sitting in a small corner of her mother's house. The light flickered as her mother stood behind her, silent, hands trembling with anger. "You're not going back there," her mother said finally. "They don't deserve another second of your life." But Amara didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the video, her own face staring back. Shamed, mocked, violated. Every share, every laugh, every hateful comment carved her name deeper into the internet. And yet, beneath the humiliation, something was awakening. She noticed something strange in the video, a detail no one else had caught. When the clipper buzzed across her scalp, an officer's sleeve slipped down just enough to reveal a tattoo, one that matched a badge number she remembered from an old case file. Her instincts sharpened. She knew corruption ran deeper than what happened that night. This wasn't just cruelty, it was cover-up. Still, the world didn't see it that way. For them, she was just another scandal, another trending moment of outrage that would fade in a week. But for Amara, it wasn't over. Not even close. Days passed. The city moved on. Her job was gone. Her friends disappeared. Even her old academy mentors stopped returning her calls. She started working nights at a diner, cleaning tables, refilling coffee cups for the same kind of uniforms that once stripped her of her pride. Sometimes they'd laugh without recognizing her. Sometimes they did and laughed louder. One night, a young customer, a college student, recognized her quietly. "You're that girl," he said softly. From the video, Amara froze. The usual words of pity or mockery didn't come. Instead, he leaned in and whispered, "What they did was wrong. I study law. I could help if you ever want to fight back." It was the first time in months she'd heard the word help without a price tag. That single conversation lit a spark. For the first time since the video, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a witness, one who'd seen the truth behind the curtain. That night she opened her old notebook. Her handwriting filled every page, names, dates, policies, loopholes. Everything she had learned in the academy before they threw her out. She started tracing back the tattoo, the officer names, the evidence they buried. One by one. The deeper she went, the uglier it got. Then came the twist. A week later, she woke up to find a new video, a leaked body cam clip. Not from her side, from theirs it showed everything. The taunting, the shaving, the slurs, the laughter, no editing, no excuses. And this time the internet didn't laugh. They raged. Thousands of people began tagging her name with a new hashtag, Justice for Amara. Comment sections turned into protests. News channels picked it up. A lawyer offered free representation, but Amara stayed silent. Reporters begged for interviews. TV hosts wanted her tears, but she wasn't ready to cry for cameras again. Instead, she waited and watched as the same officers who laughed at her were called in for questioning. The same department that mocked her started deleting posts, and for the first time the city didn't see her as a joke. They saw her as proof. Late one night, standing by her window, Amara whispered, "This isn't revenge. It's reckoning." Her mother walked in quietly. "What will you do now?" Amara looked at the city lights below, her reflection staring back. Strong, calm, unshakable. "I'm going back," she said. "Not to fight them, but to become the one thing they never thought I could be." The hum of the city filled the silence. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, almost poetic, because what they didn't know was this. The woman they once mocked was already studying for the bar exam. And soon she wouldn't just be a victim on video. She'd be the voice of justice they couldn't silence. And when that day came, they'd have to answer to her. "You really think they'll let someone like you back in?" The words echoed in Amara's mind long after the conversation ended. Her old academy instructor had said it with that smug smile, the kind that hides behind fake concern. But Amara didn't flinch. Not this time, she simply replied, "They don't have to let me. I'll walk in through the front door." That night she sat at her kitchen table surrounded by law books, notebooks, and piles of old files she'd dug out of storage. Every page was a reminder, not of failure, but of what she had survived. The same system that broke her had unknowingly taught her how to fight it. Sleep was rare. Coffee was constant. Her hands shook from exhaustion, but her eyes burned with focus. She wasn't just studying for the bar exam. She was rebuilding herself, and brick by brick, rule by rule, law by law. The internet still buzzed with her name. But now it wasn't mockery, and it was hope. Strangers sent messages. You inspired me. You made me believe again. Yet she kept her replies short. She didn't want to be a symbol. She wanted to be a weapon. Her mother watched from the doorway one evening, the soft hum of gospel music in the background. You don't eat, she said quietly. You barely sleep. I'm scared you'll lose yourself chasing this. Amara looked up, tired but unwavering. I already lost myself once, Mama. I won't again. Her mother nodded, her eyes glassy with pride and worry. Then she placed something on the table, an old worn Bible with a folded piece of paper inside. Your father's handwriting, she said. He wrote this the night before his last case. Amara unfolded the note. Just one line, truth doesn't scream. It stands and waits until lies fall apart. She read it twice. 3 times. Then smiled faintly. He'd want me to finish what he started, she whispered. The next morning, she began training in secret. Not physical, mental. Court recordings played in her earbuds while she jogged before dawn. She practiced cross-examinations in the mirror, studied corruption reports, even recorded herself to fix her tone. It was lonely, ruthless, unforgiving. But that's what it took to rebuild from ashes. Weeks turned into months. The day of the exam arrived. Rows of hopeful faces filled the hall, none of them knowing that the woman in the corner, calm, composed, braided hair neatly tied back, was once the viral face of public shame. She sat down, opened her test booklet, and whispered to herself, they recorded my fall. Let them record my rise. When she walked out hours later, the world outside felt different. The same streets where she'd been humiliated now buzzed with quiet respect. A local reporter recognized her but didn't dare to shout. People just stared, not with judgment but with curiosity. A few weeks later, a white envelope arrived in her mailbox. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. Her mother stood behind her, holding her breath. Inside, one line that changed everything. Congratulations. You have passed the bar. For a moment, Amara didn't move. She just stared at the paper. Then she laughed, and not out of joy but disbelief. It was real. After everything, it was real. But celebration wasn't her style. She folded the letter neatly, placed it beside her father's note, and whispered, Now we begin. That night she sat at her desk again, not as a student but as a strategist. She pinned photos, names, and news clippings across her wall, all tied to one web, the same department that tried to destroy her. On the center, circled in red ink, was a name, Captain Reynolds. The officer with the tattoo, the man who led the unit that shaved her head. Her next move wasn't revenge. It was justice, slow, methodical, lawful. She'd use their own system to burn them down. And just as she pinned the last note to the wall, thunder cracked outside, loud, sharp, almost like a warning. But Amara didn't look away. She simply said, Let it storm. I've waited long enough. Outside, rain poured against the glass. Inside, her reflection stared back. No longer broken, no longer scared. The woman in the window was ready. Because this time she wasn't fighting for survival. She was preparing for war, and every rule she learned would be her weapon. You again? The word slipped from Officer Grant's mouth before he could stop himself. His smug grin froze the second he realized who was standing behind the judge's bench. It was her. The woman whose head he and his buddies had shaved for fun. The woman whose screams they laughed at filming the whole thing. The woman whose viral video had turned the world against them. But now, she was wearing the black robe of authority. Her posture was calm, controlled, but her silence hit harder than any scream that day. The courtroom air thickened. Cameras clicked. Whispers rippled through the benches. Is that really her? Someone murmured. It can't be. Another whispered. Officer Grant swallowed hard, his confidence fading under the fluorescent lights. He had once been the one giving orders. Now he stood trembling before the woman he'd humiliated. Her gaze didn't flinch. Officer Grant, she said slowly, her voice steady and cold. Do you recognize the defendant in this case? He hesitated, eyes darting toward his lawyer, searching for an escape. Yes, Your Honor, he stammered. It's me. The crowd shifted and phones discreetly lifted again. Everyone wanted this moment. The reversal of power, the visual justice. She took a quiet breath, then leaned forward slightly. "I do too," she said. The calm in her tone carried more weight than anger ever could. "The internet remembers, officer. But let's make sure the law does too." A murmur of awe filled the room. Even the reporters in the back forgot to type. It wasn't revenge they were witnessing. It was balance being restored. Grant's lawyer tried to interrupt. "Your Honor, my client." She cut him off with a subtle raise of her hand. "Your client," she said firmly, "mocked an unarmed woman, violated procedure, and disgraced this uniform. Today he will face what accountability feels like." Her words were precise, surgical. Every sentence stripped away the shield he'd hidden behind. Grant tried to meet her eyes, but the weight of her gaze was too much. His hand shook, cuffed in front of him. His once polished badge, as now evidence, gleamed under the courtroom lights like a cruel reminder of who he used to be. In the front row, a few officers sat rigid, watching silently. None of them laughed this time. One even lowered his head, she noticed. For a moment, her expression softened, not out of pity but principle. Because she had already won the battle that mattered most. She hadn't become what they were. When she spoke again, her tone was calm, even formal. "This court isn't about revenge. It's about truth. And the truth is, no one, not even a cop, is above the law." The words echoed through the hall. Outside, the world was already reacting. News outlets were live streaming. Hashtags were trending again. Full circle justice began climbing the charts. Inside, Officer Grant's breathing grew uneven. Her voice broke through again, quiet but cutting. "You told me that night I didn't deserve respect. That no one would ever listen to me. Look around, officer. The world is listening now." The room fell completely silent. Not a cough, not a whisper. Just the sound of a man realizing the full weight of his own cruelty. She reached for the gavel. For a moment it looked as if her hand trembled. But it wasn't weakness. It was restraint. She could have destroyed him with her words. Instead, she let justice do it for her. "Court is adjourned," she said softly. The gavel struck once, sharp, final. Grant's head bowed. Cameras flashed, and as she stood to leave, the same officers who once laughed at her stood too. Not out of fear, but respect. Outside the courthouse, a storm of reporters waited. But she didn't stop to speak. She didn't need to. Her silence had already said everything. The world finally saw her not as a victim, but as power reborn. "Officer Grant," she said, eyes locked on him. "Do you remember the night of April 12th? Grant froze. His throat tightened. That date was a ghost, one he'd tried to bury under 1,000 excuses. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters leaned forward. Everyone in the courtroom could feel the tension sharpening like a knife. He forced a smirk, trying to sound calm. "I don't recall every detail, Your Honor. It was a long time ago." Her gaze didn't waver. "Then allow me to refresh your memory." With a nod, she signaled the clerk. The screen behind her flickered to life. Grainy footage appeared, the same viral video that once broke the internet. There he was, younger, cockier, laughing with two other officers as they held down a terrified woman in a jail cell. Her hair was being shaved. Her voice trembled as she begged them to stop. And in the background, someone joked, "Smile for the camera." The courtroom went silent. Only the faint hum of the video echoed through the speakers. Grant's smirk vanished. He looked smaller now, cornered by the truth he'd created himself. Her voice was steady, but you could feel the storm beneath it. "That woman," she said, "wasn't charged with any crime. She was detained for questioning. She was innocent. Yet you treated her like she didn't deserve dignity." Grant's lawyer jumped in, desperate. "Objection, Your Honor. This is emotional manipulation, not cross-examination." Her reply was calm, surgical. "Overruled. It's evidence. And justice has an emotional cost." The room erupted with whispers. Even the officers sitting in the back row avoided each other's eyes. Grant leaned forward, sweat gathering at his temples. "I was following protocol." She cut him off, her tone razor-sharp. "Protocol? Does your protocol include humiliation? Does it include turning a suspect's pain into a joke?" He stammered, searching for words. "We were just trying to control the situation." She didn't let him finish. "Control?" she repeated. "Is that what you call it when 3 armed men mock a defenseless woman?" The crowd shifted again, some shaking their heads, others glaring. The once powerful officer now looked like a shadow of himself, crushed under the weight of his own justifications. Then she leaned forward slightly, voice lowering. "You said something to her that night. Do you remember your words?" He stared at the floor, silent. She continued, her voice carrying the memory like fire. "A woman like you doesn't deserve respect." Gasps filled the courtroom. The line everyone remembered from the viral clip. And now, the woman he said it to was the one holding his future in her hands, he whispered, almost pleading. "Your Honor, I was young. It was a mistake." Her tone softened slightly, but her words didn't lose their edge. A mistake is forgetting to file a report. This was cruelty, deliberate, filmed, and laughed about. Grant's eyes flicked up, glossy with guilt. "I've paid enough," he muttered. She paused. For a moment her expression changed. Not pity, but power under control. "No, Officer Grant, you've only started to understand the cost of what you took from others." Silence again. Heavy. Electric. The alley, a senior attorney observing the case, finally spoke from the bench's side. "Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. The prosecution has nothing further to prove." She nodded. Noted. Then, turning to the courtroom, her voice steadied once more. "Let the record show that justice does not fade with time. It waits, and when it returns, it doesn't shout. It simply stands." Grant's head dropped. The same way hers once had in that cold, tiled cell. Only now the positions were reversed. As the gavel prepared to fall, one camera flash captured the moment perfectly. His shame, her calm, and the crowd's awe. She raised her hand, then paused. "Mr. Grant," she said quietly, "you told me once no one would ever listen to me. Today, millions are." The gavel struck, and with that single sound, the past, and every scream inside it, was finally answered. "Cut her hair. All of it." The words sliced through the stale air of the holding cell. The woman froze, her wrists trembling against the metal cuffs. Around her, 3 uniformed officers exchanged smirks, the kind of cruel laughter that lives on the edge of power. She whispered, barely audible, "Please, I haven't done anything." But they weren't listening. One of them, Officer Grant, stepped closer, electric razor in hand. The sound buzzed like a wasp ready to sting. He tilted his head with a grin. "You want respect? You gotta earn it, sweetheart." Laughter erupted behind him. Boots scraped the floor. The fluorescent light flickered above, painting the scene in harsh white. Her heart raced, pounding so loud she could barely hear the razor's hum. She tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. Just cold walls and eyes full of mockery. The razor touched her scalp. The first lock fell. Then another. And another. Every strand that hit the floor carried a piece of her dignity. Every laugh behind her another nail in the coffin of her pride. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just stared at the reflection in the metal door, a woman stripped bare by people sworn to protect. "Take a picture," one of them joked. "Let the internet see how strong she thinks she is now." And they did. A flash, a click, a photo that would spread faster than fire. Later that night, sitting in a dim corner of the station, she watched as the officers laughed around their phones. Her image, bald and broken, became entertainment. Memes, comments, cruel hashtags. Crazy black woman loses her mind at traffic stop. Another one who can't follow orders. Each post burned deeper, but she didn't cry. She sat in silence, her hands clasped, staring at the floor until sunrise. When they released her, she walked out into the empty street with nothing but a plastic bag of her belongings, and the memory of every sneer, every insult. The world had already decided who she was. But they had no idea who she would become. Months passed. The laughter faded, but the pain never did. She lost her job. Neighbors whispered. Even friends looked away, afraid her story might stain their peace. And yet every night she returned to the same routine. She studied. She read law books she borrowed from a public library. She memorized court procedures page by page. She watched old trials on a borrowed laptop, learning how justice worked and how it failed people like her. Sometimes she replayed the video, forcing herself to watch. Not to relive it, but to remember. One night, while scrolling through job listings, she stumbled across an online law program offering scholarships for victims of injustice. Her cursor hovered over the apply button. Her reflection in the screen stared back, hair just beginning to grow again, eyes steady, unblinking. That was the moment everything shifted. The woman who once sat silent in a cell began to write. Her essay spoke of humiliation not as a wound but as a weapon forged by endurance. She didn't ask for sympathy, only the chance to learn how to fight back. When the acceptance email arrived weeks later, she didn't smile. She simply closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Years blurred into long nights of study, courtroom internships, endless exams. She faced rejection, mockery, exhaustion, but never stopped. Every insult from that night became fuel. Every memory of laughter became fire. And the irony? It was Officer Grant's video, the same one that once humiliated her, that made her name known. Advocacy groups shared it, calling for reform. Donations came. The woman they tried to shame became a voice for those who couldn't speak. By the time she graduated, her story was no longer one of pain, but power. And on the night she took her oath as a judge, she stood before the mirror adjusting her black robe. Her reflection looked calm, almost unreal. The scars were still there. But now they looked like medals. Somewhere deep inside, she could still hear the razor's buzz, that cruel laughter. But this time it didn't hurt. It reminded her of who she'd been, and who she was now. And as she looked out the courthouse window at the city lights, she whispered to the memory of that night, not in anger, but in quiet victory, "You should have never touched my crown." Say something. The words echoed in the marble courtroom, sharp enough to cut through the silence. But she didn't. She just stood there, still, composed, unreadable. The woman everyone once mocked now wore the black robe of a judge. And sitting just a few feet away was Officer Grant, the same man who had humiliated her. The same man who had laughed while she begged for mercy. But now the power had shifted. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, lawyers, victims, and officers all waiting to see what she would do. They whispered her name like it was a rumor that shouldn't exist. A black woman, once an inmate, now holding the gavel? It didn't fit their world. Grant avoided her eyes, but his arrogance was gone. His face was pale, his hands restless on the defense table. Every sound, the ticking clock, the scratch of a pen seemed to crush him under the weight of silence. She finally spoke, her voice steady, deliberate. "Officer Grant, you stand accused of perjury, evidence tampering, and abuse of authority. How do you plead?" His lawyer jumped in before he could speak. "Not guilty, Your Honor." She nodded, expression unreadable. Noted. The gavel struck once, and with that sound, the past came flooding back. For a second, she saw herself again. The cold concrete floor, the laughter, the razor, the click of that camera. But she blinked it away. The courtroom wasn't a cell, and she wasn't the woman they broke. Throughout the trial, every testimony was another ghost dragged into the light. Victims told stories that sounded like hers, each one trembling, each one ignored by the system until now. The more they spoke, the heavier the air grew. At one point, a young man took the stand, his voice cracking. He said if I talked, I'd end up in the river. I believed him, the crowd gasped. Grant's lawyer tried to object, but the judge's glare silenced him. Her silence was power now. Her restraint, control. The irony didn't escape anyone, least of all Grant. Hours passed. Evidence piled up. Lies unraveled. The once proud officer looked smaller with every word, and then came the moment no one expected. During cross-examination, his lawyer tried to turn the tables. "Your Honor," he began. "With all due respect, isn't it true that you were once arrested by my client?" The room froze. Every eye turned to her. Grant smirked faintly as if this was his chance to take back control. She met his gaze for the first time. "Yes," she said simply. The courtroom waited for more. But she didn't flinch. She didn't defend herself. She just let the silence hang there, thick, powerful, undeniable. Her voice returned, calm as glass. "And that's why I insisted on transparency. Every motion, every ruling in this case has been reviewed by the higher court. You will not twist this into pity or revenge. This is about justice." Grant looked down. His smirk was gone. In that moment, the entire courtroom seemed to shift. The woman once stripped of dignity now stood taller than the system that failed her. Her silence didn't come from fear anymore, it came from strength. From knowing that every eye, every whisper, every doubt only made her victory louder. The verdict came hours later. Guilty. Grant's knees buckled. His lawyer slumped. Reporters scribbled like vultures circling the end of a story, but the judge didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just watched as he was led away in handcuffs, the same sound she once knew too well. As the doors closed behind him, the gallery erupted in whispers. Some were proud. Some were shocked. Some couldn't handle seeing justice in that form. She removed her glasses and sat back for a moment. The courtroom emptied, leaving her alone in that vast space. The echoes of the gavel still hung in the air, mixing with the ghosts of every injustice ever silenced. She looked down at the gavel in her hand. The same hand that once trembled under humiliation now held the symbol of authority. But it didn't feel like victory, it felt like responsibility. Outside, cameras flashed through the courthouse windows. Reporters shouted her name, but she didn't walk toward them. Instead, she turned away and whispered to herself, "Justice doesn't scream. It stands still." Then she stepped down from the bench and walked out of the courtroom, quiet, composed, unshaken. The world had finally seen her strength. But they hadn't yet seen her purpose, because this wasn't her ending. It was only the silence before the next storm. Guilty. The word cracked through the courtroom like thunder. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. It was as if the world itself had frozen. Every whisper, every camera flash, every heartbeat waiting to see what she would do next. The judge sat still. Calm. Her face unreadable. Only her eyes, those steady, quiet eyes, betrayed the storm behind them. The same man who once laughed in her face now stood trembling in handcuffs. Officer Grant, his badge was gone. His voice, too. The courtroom that once echoed with his arrogance now swallowed his silence. He looked at her, desperate, pleading. "Please," he muttered. "You don't understand. I was just—" Her gavel struck once, hard enough to cut through his words. "I understand perfectly," she said. Her tone wasn't angry, it was final. "You had power, and you used it to destroy lives. But that power is gone now." The gallery erupted, some cheering, some crying. Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters pushed toward the aisle, hungry for a headline. But she didn't move. She didn't celebrate, because for her, justice wasn't a victory. It was a burden finally lifted from her shoulders. As the bailiff led Grant away, his head hung low. For a moment he turned just once toward her. His lips trembled. "Are you proud of yourself?" She didn't answer. The silence was her answer. When the courtroom emptied, she stayed behind. The echoes of the verdict still lingered, blending with the faint hum of the lights overhead. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished bench, the same seat that once felt like a dream. Now it felt heavy, almost sacred. She took a deep breath, her mind drifting to the night it all began. The flashing red lights, the cold metal cuffs, the laughter. How the world had watched her humiliation but never her healing, until today. Now they were watching again. But this time, not out of mockery. Out of awe. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had gathered. People held up phones, signs, tears in their eyes. Some shouted her name. Others whispered it like a prayer. When she stepped through the doors, the noise erupted. Applause, chants, the sound of 1,000 stories colliding into one. A reporter shoved a microphone forward. "Judge Taylor, do you have any words for the people? What does this verdict mean to you?" She paused. Cameras zoomed in. Every network was live. And then she said quietly, "It means we're not voiceless anymore." The crowd roared. But she didn't linger. She didn't bask in the spotlight. She walked past them, her heels echoing against the courthouse steps like the slow rhythm of resolve. As she reached her car, a small voice stopped her. "Ma'am?" She turned. A teenage girl stood there, clutching a torn notebook. Her eyes were wide, trembling with emotion. "My brother. He was arrested by that same cop. Nobody believed us, but you did." The judge's stern expression softened. She stepped closer, resting a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Then promise me this," she said softly. "Don't stop believing in justice. Even when it's quiet, even when it's slow." The girl nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. When the judge got into her car, she finally exhaled. The courthouse loomed behind her, majestic, unyielding. The same place that once stripped her dignity now stood as proof of her redemption. But as she drove away, her mind didn't feel at peace. Justice had been served. But peace? That was something different, because she knew one verdict couldn't erase years of silence. One conviction couldn't undo the pain buried under concrete and shame. She thought of every woman, every man still sitting in cells, still praying to be heard. And she knew her fight wasn't over. Back home, she placed the gavel on her table. It glimmered under the soft light. Her daughter peeked into the room. "Mom, you're on TV," she said, smiling. "Everyone's talking about you." The judge smiled faintly. "Let them talk," she said. "Maybe this time they'll listen too." Outside, the night was calm. The city lights shimmered on the horizon. Somewhere out there, injustice still breathed, but not as freely as before. She looked out the window, eyes reflecting both weariness and strength. "Dignity," she whispered. "That's the real verdict." And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to close her eyes, not in defeat, but in peace. The silence that once crushed her now wrapped around her like armor, because silence in her hands had become power